Okay,
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Indivisible Evanston's meeting, Countdown to November. Do you know your assignment? I'm Candace Davis, one of the co-leaders of Indivisible Evanston. We're now less than 70 days out from Election Day, and we're feeling the hope and the excitement. And we're very excited to bring you some excellent speakers tonight who's going to share with us what each of us can do to ensure a blue wave in November. We're going to hear from organizers for Wisconsin and Michigan, and from an ACLU expert on Project 2025, the threat that should make everyone realize what is at stake in this election. It really is a battle between freedom and fascism. We ask that you keep yourself on mute during the meeting. We're going to have time for questions after our speakers' presentations, and ask that you put your questions in the chat. We'll be tracking them, and Kitty Knecht will ask the questions of the speakers. So as you can tell, we'll be recording this meeting tonight, and we'll make it available to those who registered and in next Monday's newsletter. Our first speaker tonight is Will Krueger of the Wisconsin Democrats. Will is speaking from his car tonight, where he is headed to St. Louis to help a friend with COVID. So bear with us while we try to coordinate his slides for him. Will is an organizer and a lawyer who works for the Wisconsin Democratic Party as the Deputy Voter Protection Director for their hotline and ballot cure. He's a recent graduate of Yale Law School and has previously worked with the Voting Rights Project of the ACLU and with Raphael Warnock's Senate office, as well as with the California Attorney General's Civil Rights Enforcement Section, and as a community organizer in St. Louis. He's worked for more than a dozen progressive campaigns, including Biden for president in Wisconsin in 2020. So take it away, Will. I will share.
All right.
Let me share my screen. And you can
Great.
tell.
First of all, being that set up, I just want to thank you all for your time and for giving some of this precious time to me. I really appreciate it very, very much. Like Candace said, I work with the Hotline and Cure program in the Wisconsin Democratic Party. And I'm going to start by framing what I think this election is about, and then I will discuss how you can get involved in it. But first, I want to make sure the slides are working. Is everything working all right, Candace?
Okay, can you guys see those slides? It says, "Hi, I'm Will." Leslie, can you see those?
no, I can't.
No, I just see like a desktop with all sorts of slides.
That's the wrong page then. Bear with me just another moment. It's supposed to be desktop 2. Let's try that again.
Yeah.
There we go.
Excellent.
All right. So the main thing to take away here is my email address, which is wkrueger@2024victory.com. My last name is Krueger. And then you can always contact the entire voter protection team at voter-protection@WisDems.org. So either one of those will work. And we are always super happy to talk to anybody one-on-one, answer any questions you might have. If you could go to the next slide, please, Candace, that'd be super helpful. All right. For me, fundamentally, what this election is about is, are voters going to elect someone who believes in democracy, or are voters going to elect someone who disdains democracy? Donald Trump's entire theme of his campaign is that he won an election that we know he lost. The Republican Party has been organized against free and fair voting for many, many years, and he's taken it to a fever pitch. And I think that one of the most important ways that any person could be involved in this election is helping ensure that voters, especially in swing states, have an opportunity to freely and fairly cast a ballot for the candidate that they want to be the president, and that vote is counted. And that's what voter protection does. Basically, we make sure that any last-minute problems that arise, we help address them. So if somebody doesn't know what type of photo ID they need in order to be able to cast a ballot on election day, we have a voter assistance hotline. They can call that number, and they can get answers. Somebody files an absentee ballot, but there was a minor mistake on the outside of the absentee ballot envelope that threatens whether or not that vote will be counted. We contact that voter, we explain the rules to them simply and clearly, and we work with them to make sure their vote gets counted. We do tons of affirmative voter education, and We work directly with the people who run the elections to make sure that they are free and fair. In the local liaison program, we talk with the municipal clerks. In Wisconsin, municipal clerks run elections, so there are 1,850 different municipal employees, one for every municipality in the state, who run an election. And then on election day, we are right there on the ground, eyes and ears, with poll workers and most importantly, poll observers. People that are there and see if any problem arises, whether it affects one voter or the entire precinct, and we get lawyers on the case and we address it as soon and as effectively as we possibly can. So I'll go through all those programs in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Yep, and that's how you can get involved. So our number one need is in-person poll observing. That would be coming up to the state of Wisconsin and driving to a polling place and being there physically in person, being our eyes and ears and making sure that no matter what happens, we know about it if there's a problem so that we can get trained attorneys to give you the advice that you might need to give to the voter, or we can get trained attorneys to do what they need to do to protect the right to vote for everyone at that polling place. So whatever it takes, right? Sometimes what it takes is just a call to the municipal clerk. Sometimes what it takes is a call to the voter. Sometimes what it takes is a legal injunction. And we will do what we need to do. But what we need to be able to do it is poll observers, people who are willing to give their time on election day to come up, get assigned to a polling place, go to that polling place, and do their best to spot issues and resolve them on the ground. In a real sense, you are the last line of defense against voter suppression and an indispensable in-person resource for voters. So if you're thinking, I don't want to be sitting around feeling anxious at my house on election day with people, this is a perfect opportunity for you. Next slide, please. A similar opportunity that does not require you to drive to the state of Wisconsin, so maybe a little bit more accessible, is to help us phone bank and find poll observers. We have a huge list, tens of thousands of people who we think are likely to be poll observers if we can reach them and explain to them what the job is and why it's so important. So we run 4 phone banks a week until the end of October, where we call together and we try to recruit poll observers. Because poll observers is the most important part of our program right now, recruiting poll observers is extremely high impact and super necessary. That's how we grow our program, so that we have enough poll observers all across the state so that no matter where the issue arises, we can address it and help voters. That's another extremely important opportunity. Next slide, please. Hotline is one that's near and dear to my heart because I help oversee it. If you like listening to me talk, hotline would be great for you because I do all the trainings and all the management. But it's exactly what it sounds like. Voting laws can get confusing. The bottom of the line is, it is safe and effective and efficient and easy to vote in Wisconsin if you are equipped with the information that you need. A lot of voters, unfortunately far too many, are confused or don't have access to easily understandable information. And that's where we come in on the hotline. We staff the hotline. Anyone can call us from 10 to 6, Tuesday to Saturday, and then starting in mid-October, every day from 10 to 6, and we will answer their question, and we will follow up with them, and we will make sure that they get what they need to vote. Some of these questions are really complicated. Some of these questions are really simple. Every single one is extremely important. And it's important for two reasons that I think we should consider kind of as you go through this entire meeting and talk about the stakes of this election. It's important because every voter should be, just as a fundamental fact about our democracy, empowered with what they need to cast their ballot. That's what democracy is about. Regular people like Candace and other volunteers on this call who help other people who they may never meet in person raise their voice and participate in our democracy. So that's why it's really important to me that we help those voters. It's also really important because the way that the voting system works in Wisconsin disadvantages groups that are more likely to be Democratic. So if we can empower voters, we are more likely to win. Having said that, we help every voter who calls. We don't ask what party they're going to vote for. We don't advocate for them to vote for a particular issue or person. We just help them vote because the abstract value of democracy is what is at stake in this election, and we want to make sure we are living up to it in every way. That's the hotline. We need as much help as we can get, and we'll give you training so that you feel prepared and equipped to talk about Wisconsin election law, no matter the question. And if it's a question you can't answer, then we will personally, perhaps me or my staff will address it. Next slide, please. And then another really big bucket of ways to help is called ballot cure. Absentee voting is extremely popular in Wisconsin. Hundreds of thousands of people do it every year. Hundreds of thousands of people will do it starting September 20th. So voting is really on its way here. And absentee voting in Wisconsin, you have to follow certain steps. You have to have a witness. The witness has to sign the outside of your ballot. You have to sign the outside of your ballot. There has to be an address where the clerk can reach the witness, and it has to be delivered at a certain time. So some of that doesn't always happen. Often voters really want to express their voice, but they make a really genuine, good faith, honest mistake. They forget to put the state of Wisconsin and the zip code on the address, or they write their name and they're in a rush to get the thing to the envelope to the mailbox, and they forget to sign it. You know, something very simple and straightforward like that. And then their vote is at risk of not being counted at all. We get lists of every voter in the state of Wisconsin, which is publicly available information. We get it from the state, and then we call and text and try to contact those voters and walk them through the rules. Again, I want to say that this is important for two reasons. First is that every vote should count, and just the value of calling a voter and telling them, I understand that you wanted to vote, and you may not even know this yet, sir or ma'am, but your vote is not going to count unless you take the following steps. People really appreciate that, and it feels so powerful that you personally are the difference between somebody trying to vote and not being allowed to, and somebody actually voting. You are turning non-voters into voters. And again, the second reason is that absentee voters are primarily more than 50% voting for Democrats, and these problems more than 50% affect Democrats. So doing this helps us win elections. And let me give you a really powerful example of that. In Wisconsin, we have April elections every general election year. So we had an April election this year. We also had one in 2020. In the April election in 2020, 1.8% of the votes cast were not counted because of issues related to ballot share, because of someone forgot a signature, or the address was incorrect, or it wasn't sealed tightly enough, so it felt like it was tampered. Any number of small issues. 1.8% of all votes cast. All right, well, that's tens of thousands of people who were not allowed to vote. The party saw that, and they implemented a really robust ballot cure program run by volunteers. And we scored the rate of rejection from 1.8 in April to 0.2 in November. 90% increase from 1.8 to 0.2 in terms of voters being allowed to cast their ballots. And that was 36,000 ballots, give or take a little bit. The margin between Trump and Biden in Wisconsin was 20,658. So we more than cured the margin. If the cure program did not exist, and that was the only difference, Trump almost certainly would have won the election. So this is extremely powerful work. Logistically, it's actually extremely simple too. You can call on your own time. We will give you access to a really big list of voters, and we'll just ask you to call on your own time through our phone banking software called Dance. Or you can come to a phone bank, which we're going to have once a week starting September 18th. So every Wednesday starting September 18th, we're going to have phone banks where everyone is invited and we can all work together. Or you can volunteer for the hotline, and while you're on a hotline shift, if things are a little slow, we can give you a ballot cure list so you can call voters and try to help them cure their ballots, kind of affirmatively reach out to them instead of waiting for them to call you. And you can do this from the safety of your own home. We do calls Monday through Saturday from 9 to 9 until maybe mid-October, and then we'll ramp it up to every day, just to make sure we don't leave any voters on the table there. It's all about turning non-voters into voters, and as you all know, when turnout is high, Democrats are more likely to win. Next slide, please. So I really strongly urge you to all sign up now. You can become a poll observer simply by filling out a form, and then we will contact you to talk to you about what you need and where your polling observer site will be, which poll we're going to assign you to, and you'll get tons of training opportunities to make sure you're prepared. And then we also have hotline and cure training. We will train you about the hotline and cure at the same time. So it's an hour and a half, and teach you all you need to know to be able to do both. That's what the poll observer sign up looks like. It's super simple. All you need to do is some information. So I have or have not before travel this distance on election day, and then we'll contact you with all you need. And then the link for the hotline and cure training goes to a site called Mobilize, which is where you can sign up for any of those trainings that work best for you. We have 5 upcoming in the first 2 weeks of September, and then we're going to launch the hotline itself in the last week of September or the second to last. So again, this election for me and for many Americans, millions of Americans across the country, is about whether we are going to vote for democracy or whether we are going to vote for the opposite of democracy. Disdain for participation and lies about a free and fair election that are about holding on to power that was improperly seized. And so I hope we all can do what we can to empower every voter in Wisconsin to choose democracy, to have their voice heard, because thank you all for your help. And I'm really happy to answer any questions for as long as I don't go.
Okay, there were questions about ballot cure, Will. It seems like you got some people interested there, so that's good. Ron asked, do you receive lists of ballots that need to be cured? How does that work?
Yes, so all the information about whether a voter was rejected and for what probable reason, they're kind of sorted into 4 buckets, and all that is centralized by the Wisconsin data thing. It's a data software called Badgerbook. So we get the list from Badgerbook of all the voters, and then we call them. And since we have a little bit of information, we know what bucket they're in. We can be a little bit directed about what the problem likely is, and we can offer them specific and helpful advice.
Okay, I think the other questions were things you covered later after they were asked about where physically this happens and when ballot curing goes on. So I think we've done the questions. What can you tell us about the state of the race in Wisconsin?
Right. So the state of the race in Wisconsin is that it is tied. It is entirely a coin flip at this.
Yep.
I know that we're all seeing some really positive polling out of Wisconsin, and I'm feeling more optimistic than I was maybe 3 weeks ago. But I just spoke, we had a leadership retreat. Every deputy and every director went to Milwaukee, and we met with the campaign leadership, like the campaign managers and the senior advisors. And they walked us through the big picture data. It is as tied could be. And every vote is going to count. It's going to be a point. And polling in Wisconsin is not always predictive of the result. That's what I'll say. Joe Biden was winning in the polls by 8.4% in 2020 on the night before the election, and he won the state by 20,650 votes, or roughly 2/3 of 1 percentage point. So it's all going to come down to the work that we put in, and whether or not we win in close swing states is decided by people just like you.
Okay, I have just one more question about ballot curing. Are those calls made from your own phone number, or is it from a phone bank platform?
That's a great question. It's initially set up to be your own phone number, but we are happy to walk anyone through getting a Google Voice. We have dozens of volunteers who use Google Voice so that it shows up as a different phone number, but it's routed directly to you. Really, just again, want to emphasize this stuff is extremely high impact, and it's really convenient. You can do it all from your home, except for poll observing, which is really important that you're on the ground. But hotline and cure and phone banking you can do from your home, and it makes a big difference. And I am an organizer because on election day 2016, I woke up and I thought I didn't do anything to help Hillary Clinton win. I wasn't working for her campaign. I was doing something else that I thought was important. But then I realized I want to put myself in a position where I know that I did what mattered when it mattered, and I can feel good about myself and good about the outcome. So I really encourage everybody to think about that and find a way that works for you to make a difference and raise your voice and help others do the same.
Great. Thanks so much, Will. And we certainly encourage everybody to do that too.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for that information, for all you're doing. And sorry, taking time to meet with us tonight. Please.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, okay, take care.
Talk to y'all.
Bye-bye.
I just got a text message from our next speaker saying that her power went out.
Oh, no. Okay.
So I said she's trying to see if she can connect through her phone.
All right. Well, why don't we jump over to we'll switch places with Bob and Linda. How about that? Bob and Linda, are you still on?
We're here. I had to unmute myself, and that's perfectly okay. I'm sorry we cut her power off so we could go earlier, but that's the kind of stuff we do all the time. Anyway, let me see if I can share my screen.
Sure. And let me introduce you to talking to us about Wisconsin opportunities. So it's actually in that order. Bob speaking was a founding member of Indivisible Evanston in 2016, and so was Linda. They both served on our leadership team. They took over our involvement with the Wisconsin DMV, Department of Vehicle Voter Registration Program, for the 2020 election. And then when COVID closed that program, Linda and Bob converted over to the mailing, texting, calling program that produced 26,000 Wisconsin.
We're getting a lot of static and it's hard to understand.
Okay, well, I'm hearing Linda. Can you guys put yourself on mute for just a second? Thanks. Yeah, I was catching a lot of static from them. Thank you for bringing that up. So when COVID closed the DMV registration program in 2020, Linda and Bob converted over to a mailing, texting, calling program that produced 26,000 Wisconsin registrations in 2020 and 29,000 in 2022. They're bringing that program back for 2024 and giving you an opportunity to be part of that. And they want to talk with us about it tonight. So if you guys are set to go, Bob, do you want to take it away? Oh, Bob, you're muted.
Unmute Bob.
Bob, you're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Let me know if you can see the presentation, okay?
Your sound is a little rough.
Okay, geez. We're in the mountains of South Carolina. I'm surprised at that.
Can you just turn it down a little bit?
Turn it down, yes. Is that better?
No, try again.
Okay, let me. How's that? Or you know what? I'll go on the speaker of my computer. Is this better?
Yeah, that is better.
Okay, sorry. This is the equipment. Anyway, I will do this in 5 minutes as promised. This is the program we did in 2020 and 2022. And the word I want you to always
understand
the word. It is. Okay, was it better before?
You were really loud.
Oh, because I was using a headphone and I took that off.
Okay right now.
Am I okay now? Am I understandable?
Yeah, well, sometimes. Up from your foot.
I'm gonna go back to the headphone. It may be loud, but I think it was probably clear.
Bob, try taking your camera off.
Oh, okay. Let me do that. Give me a minute.
Yeah, and I gotta to try to turn off your headset.
Okay, I turned off the camera.
Still not good.
Still not good.
Okay. I'm gonna go back to the.
That's better.
This is better?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't do anything, but that figures. So let me bring up the presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, and am I understandable at all?
Yes.
Oh, Well, that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions? Anyway, I'll try to move along quickly. This is a program that we did in 2020, in 2022 with incredible results, working with the partners that you see on the screen. The key partner is Rust Belt Rising, who's basically coordinated the funding for this. And this is a very expensive program to run. You'll see why in a minute. How does this program work? Well, this year, 2024, we are going after 102,000 unregistered Wisconsin voters. We are sending them a partially completed voter registration form in the mail. Then Indivisible Evanston manages to send them, I think, 3 or 4 texts. And then the part that Linda and I are coordinating is we do what are called chase calls to confirm that they got the packet and encourage them to register and send it in. We also offer to answer questions. One editorial comment, because I am a telepath, I know you're all thinking the same thing. I hate making phone calls. Well, I do too. And these are the easiest, simplest, least offensive phone calls you'll ever make, because basically, as you'll see, all we're asking them is, did you get the packet? Would you fill it out? Would you send it in? Have a nice day. So these are really easy calls to make. Who are these 102,000 people? They've been identified through Civitech, one of our partners. They're mostly formerly registered voters in urban areas of Wisconsin, highly likely Democrats. And in Wisconsin, a voter suppression state, when you move, you basically have to start over. And a lot of people don't know that. Also, a lot of people who thought they were registered have been unceremoniously removed from the Wisconsin voter rolls. And so this is something that helps them out a lot, because some of them don't even know they're not registered anymore. So we use all that information to figure out who the 102 are. Well, does this work? Well, I used the word effective at the beginning. I don't know of anything that is pound for pound, minute for minute more effective than what we're doing. In 2020, for example, the last presidential election, this program by itself registered 26,048 voters. And President Biden won Wisconsin by 20,682. Will quoted 20,650, so we're 32 apart, but I think that's okay. Anyway, this year, any of you that did this before, working with a thing called Call Hub, which was a monster to use, we are now using a super easy auto dialer called Scale to Win. There are no accounts. You go through a little bit of training and you make a couple of clicks and you're up and running and making calls. We use an auto dialer, so we're only doing phone banks this time because it's incredibly effective. Your computer is only connected when somebody picks up the phone on the other end. So you are looking at your screen for 15, 20, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. But because we're making so many calls during the phone bank, it really, really works well. And of course, you see the name and phone number of the person you're talking to. And here's this super easy script. I'm a volunteer with the Wisconsin Voter Registration Program. We're sending you a voter registration packet in the mail. Please complete it and send it in. If you're going to make a call, it doesn't get any simpler than that. So as I said, we're doing them in phone banks. In our case, for the state of Wisconsin, they're Saturdays from 10 a.m. to noon, Mondays 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Each session starts with a very short training session because it's really simple to do, followed by we go for 2 hours. You can do it for as long as you want. We want everybody. You can come and do it for 5 minutes for all we care. Just make calls. So we're keeping it simple this time. In the past, we tried to train people a little bit about the Wisconsin voting processes and procedures. We're not doing that anymore. You don't have to be an expert. We're calling people up. If they have any questions, we refer them to the Wisconsin Voter Helpline. If they want to register online, we give them myvote.wi.gov. Our mission here is to simply get them to either fill out the form or go online and register to vote and then move on to the next person. So we already have 247 volunteers signed up, so we're off to a tidal wave kind of a start. On our first Saturday, we made 9,300 calls, and last night we made 1,500 calls. So we're going to get through that 102,000 pretty quickly, probably within the next month or so. And then after that, I'm not sure what we're doing. So I'm going to keep this real simple. This is the end. If you're interested, just send me an email. And you can remember this email address. Anybody can. bobbestbike@gmail.com. And I'll give you extra credit if you can guess what my hobby is. And Candace, that's it. So I'll stop.
All right, well, Bob, thanks a lot. That's a great program. Obviously, very easy calls to make, so I encourage people to participate. And I put if you're like me and can't remember anything, I put it in his email in the chat. So, all right. So her power is back on, and hopefully we can go to our next speaker. And if you want to get your slides ready, Sara.
Are you there, Sarah?
Yeah, can you hear us?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Okay. Sarah's going to talk to us about what's going on in Michigan and the opportunities to make a difference there. Sara Smirin has a passion for building cause-driven, groundbreaking grassroots organizations and a background in fundraising, marketing, and nonprofit management. When she was at Pelota Teamwork, she was part of the team that grew the AIDS rides and Avon breast cancer walks into record-breaking fundraiser. As a founding member and director of Moms Demand Action, Go Moms Demand Action, she helped craft the organization's structure and membership to build the country's first and largest grassroots gun violence prevention organization. She recently graduated from Harvard Divinity School with a Master of Religion and Public Life and is currently working in Detroit for the Michigan Coordinated Campaign to elect Vice President Harris and Democrats up and down the ballot. Actually, I would, maybe I better change that to President Harris. Yes, a Los Angeles native. She lives in the Bay Area with her husband and 2 sons who are both in college, but is currently living in Michigan. So Sara, please share what you know.
Great. So I'm going to stop your screen sharing and pull up my slides. Give me a second here. All right. I hope you're seeing a slideshow. Are you seeing my desktop or anything funny
Yep.
like that?
What is the Michigan One campaign?
Great. Okay. Thank you for
You
that.
do need to click slideshow, Sarah.
What?
Click slideshow.
I did. Are you seeing the thing on
Yeah,
the side?
we're seeing with the bookmarks down the side.
I'll take care of that in 1 second. Here,
Okay,
I'll do
thank you.
this. First, I will say thank you all so much. Trying to close out my bookmarks and there we go. Okay. So 2 really incredible acts to follow. Everyone is doing such incredibly important work, and I am just like very grateful to be included among this team. Kitty, is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm going to try and go fairly quickly through this. So Wisconsin is doing amazing work. Hopefully we are doing similarly incredible work in Michigan. I work for the One campaign. That's the coordinated campaign for Michigan Democrats in the state. And as I said, we work to elect Democrats up and down the ballot, from the president to the Senate, to the House, to the state legislature. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the past few cycles in Michigan to have a better understanding of how critical Michigan is, and also just how fragile Michigan is as a swing state, a battleground state. So, Will talked about this. On November 8th in 2016, Donald Trump won Michigan by 10,704 votes. That comes down to 2 votes a precinct. It was the narrowest margin of victory in Michigan's presidential election history. And I'm sure many of us remember the shock that we felt when we woke up the next morning. This is how slim the margin was in Michigan. So what happened? Well, that shocked Senator Debbie Stabenow as well, and she decided that was not going to happen again on her watch. And so she built the One campaign. It was initially funded by her campaign and the Michigan Democratic Party. And the goal was to mobilize Michigan and turn out voters in record numbers up and down the ballot. So in 2018, Gretchen Whitmer, big Gretch to those who know and love her, Jocelyn Benson and Dana Nessel all won their races for governor, secretary of state, and attorney general, respectively. Garland Gilchrist won for lieutenant governor, and we flipped 2 congressional seats and 5 House seats. Continuing on to 2020, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the White House, and Gary Peters won his Senate seat. Oh no, my power just went out again. All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
So,
we can hear
Yeah,
you.
we can hear you.
Your slideshow is not advancing.
Yeah, your slideshow is still on what is the Michigan One campaign? Is that where it's supposed to be? I think she froze.
Yeah.
Let's see if
Oh,
we get her back in a second.
bummer.
All right. Is she texting you? I just want to see what
Not
she
yet.
did. She try to get on her phone? That might be her best bet, but
Yeah.
all right. Oh, we lost her. Okay. We can go on. Should we switch over to Ed and give her a chance to come back?
Sure. Yeah, I'll text her that we're going to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, that was fascinating, but we also have an additional fascinating speaker for you. And let me just switch down to Ed's. Yeah. Ed Yohnka, who is with us tonight to talk about Project 2025, is the Director of Communications and Public Policy at ACLU, Illinois. He's going to talk to us about the dangers of Project 2025. Hopefully all of you are somewhat familiar with this nightmare agenda for the MAG administration, but he's going to help us understand more so we can better communicate with family, friends, and other voters. Ed is a primary spokesman for the ACLU in Illinois. He appears regularly on television and radio programs in Illinois and throughout the nation. He's also widely cited in newspapers and publications on legal and legislative matters related to the ACLU of Illinois' priorities. He's been with the ACLU Illinois since 1999. Before that, he served on the staff of the American Bar Association, spending most of that time as a special presidential assistant in the ABA's Office of the President. Thanks for being here tonight, Ed. We appreciate your flexibility on switching things around and would love to hear more from you because we need to understand more.
Well, thank you, Candace, and I thank you for that introduction. It's always great to be reminded how old you are when you talk about things. I want to start out, first of all, just by expressing, a deep appreciation and affection for the work of Indivisible. I think over the last, 8 years, this organization has done a lot to really kind of help to repair and fix and mend the parts of our democracy that have really been under critical stress, and really push back against many of the civil liberties infringements that we've seen, across the country. And so I'm happy to be here to join you. And I'm really happy to talk a little bit more about Project 2025, because I think this is something which I suspect that every single person on this call has heard something about, has some concern about, and is thinking about in some way, shape, or form as we go into this election cycle. And I think, as I begin this, I just want to say, I think this is an important discussion for us to have, because in many ways, as we think about all the reasons that we're concerned about this particular election cycle, I think that in many ways, this particular document, this particular approach to governing really underscores a number of, the real stakes that we see in this election. So many of you probably know a little bit of this, but let me just start by sort of answering the question, what is Project 2025? In short, Project 2025 is a governing document. It is literally a 100-day onward plan to push through a sweeping set of very conservative, very unpopular, and very damaging proposals through a new administration, and to do so, frankly, without the support and largely without debate from the American people. It is in many ways a restructuring of our government in a way that cedes more power to an executive, a conservative executive in this instance, while at the same time advancing policies that these particular policy advocates know could never be adopted and passed in the regular course of congressional business. And so it is really an attempt, again, to impose viewpoints, policies, and processes that have minority support using mechanisms which we haven't seen before in terms of much of the operation of our country. The project has been led and directed by the Heritage Foundation, along with support from a number of different, sort of right-wing groups in Washington, D.C. It has largely been funded by right-wing dark money, and many of whom aren't identified, and we don't know exactly what interests they have in particular things. I think there are some breadcrumbs along the way in terms of who's supporting this and what it's doing. And it was either written or written with input from more than 140 members, former members of the Trump administration. As I say, the project is described as a mandate for leadership by a new conservative administration, but it's also been described as those most close to it as a way to actually implement many of the things and many of the proposals that Donald Trump has called for either during his presidency or in the years that he has been out of office. And I just want to also say, before I dig into a little bit of this as well, that just, identifying sort of that elephant in the room, as it were, that the president, the former president, has attempted to distance himself from the document, distance himself from the project. I think it's very important to acknowledge that most of these are his ideas. They are not things that were somehow made up by others. And the second thing is he hasn't actually rejected any specific policy that's contained in the document itself. So not only does he have the personnel who are close to it, it actually reflects a lot of things that he has advanced and he has pushed. I think there's two ways to think about Project 2025. I think there are two kind of sides of the issue with Project 2025 that is that probably should alarm us all, or at least make us concerned and talk about this with our friends and neighbors and others. The first bucket of things that I'll talk about are really things that change sort of the structure and the power of the federal government. That is to say that fundamentally change how things are done in the way that allows an executive to streamline, steamroll, and essentially bully their way through in terms of policy, where that might not have been something that was possible heretofore. And the second thing is that there's really, I think, a need to think about the actual cruelty of the policies themselves. We talk about Project 2025. We talk about the way, I think you hear people shorthand, oh, Trump's 2025. as though it's just a political football. It's a political discussion point. It's a talking point in something. As you'll see as we talk about what's happening with this, you know, it's actually a document that does real harm and real damage to millions of Americans. And I think we shouldn't ever detach from the idea or the scope of what's happening at a think tank in Washington, the real harm that that does out in the nation writ large. So I think that's one thing. So let me talk as a beginning then a little bit about the structure piece that I mentioned. And the main element of that I think has gotten the most attention is the way in which Project 2025 actually conceives and plans for a reformatting of government away from a civil service that is expert, that is stays from administration to administration, that really does do the policy work of the federal government with, again, expertise, with knowledge, and with fealty to the law, and with fealty to actually completing the mission of the agency or group with which the individual works. Project 2025 contemplates that those kind of career civil servants would be rescheduled or reclassified under federal regulations so that they were essentially presidential appointees. It would in fact be and again, the project is very straightforward in terms of this, or the document is very straightforward in terms of the qualification to serve in any part of the federal government, in any executive branch agency, is not knowledge, agency, commitment, etc. It is loyalty to the executive and the president in this case. That the only people who are put in those places are people who will implement the president's policies at the president's request because they're loyal to him or her, and not because they have, again, any fealty or any loyalty to the mission of the agency or the agency itself. We would end up in this instance with, you know, the idea of that loyalty as the main qualification. It would impact the oversight of people who know what the law is and know the way to implement laws. And I think we have to think about this in something that we heard regularly if we're thinking about Donald Trump from the first Trump administration, in which, especially around immigration issues, the president would say to somebody, why don't we just do X? The person would say it's illegal. And the president would then say, well, you should do that, you know, and I'll pardon you. If you think about people who are only loyal to an individual and that individual is offering them a pardon for breaking the law, the inducements are all on the side of law breaking, of recklessness, of lawlessness, and of chaos. And I think that structure and breaking apart that structure in our federal system is a thing that we ought to all be concerned about. The second structural issue, which really I think doesn't get as much attention as the staffing issue, is of course that Project 2025 contemplates the use of something that we haven't really seen since Richard Nixon was president, and that is so-called impoundments. This is a theory of governing that says that the president can impound money that has been lawfully approved by Congress and designated for certain things, and in exchange withhold that money until the president thinks it's appropriate to spend that. And this is without a congressional authorization to do that. And that becomes very important because that money being impounded can then be used for a wide range of things. For example, if the Department of Education, one of the things that the project contemplates is actually ending and eliminating the Department of Education. It is highly unlikely that a Congress would pass such a measure. And the thought here is the president simply could impound the funds for that agency and have it just sort of strangled for lack of resources, and therefore do away with it in that way. The other element that I think you'll see, and it's an interesting that this came up just today in something that candidate Trump talked about, was the use of federal funds through impoundment in order to try to enforce local governments or state governments to behave in a fashion that's consistent with the views of the president, not consistent with law or consistent with state law. So as an example, the president said, the former president has indicated that he would only support local law enforcement agencies across the country that do aggressive stop and frisk policies. We know that stop and frisk is a policy that doesn't work, that drives a wedge between the community and the police. But in other words, in order to get federal funds, a law enforcement agency might be induced or think they would be induced to have to engage in stop and frisk in order to get that funding. So as I said, so that's some of the structural pieces of it that I think are troubling. Let me turn and talk quickly. I think some of these are areas that you may have thought about or heard about. There are others I think are equally important that may be less on your mind in terms of who gets harmed and how. And the first is in the area of free speech, free expression, and free thinking. Project 2025 actually talks about using federal law to punish journalists and protesters at the local level, especially where protesters, in their view, where protesters are out in order to, quote unquote, undermine the administration. This is a theory, just to say and identify this, this is a theory that many people have, that the protests that sprang up in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in 2020 were not really a racial reckoning or a call for police reform, that they were intended and funded and used in order to undermine Donald Trump in a re-election year. And so the notion here is using that to, using federal law to try to punish those protesters or journalists or others. There's threats to remove FCC licenses from news agencies who the government and the president in particular might conceive of as being hostile to their policies. There are efforts to use federal law and, again, federal funding and impoundments to try to change classroom materials around the country so that everybody looks more like Florida with the Don't Say Gay law, or taking books off the shelves as opposed to, the kind of free exchange of information and ideas, education and real history that many of us expect and want in our classrooms. In another area, in the area of reproductive rights and access to reproductive health care, we know that 1 in 3 women Americans, or those who can get pregnant, now live in a state that has an abortion ban. Despite what we've heard in terms of some efforts to back off on this, Project 2025 actually contemplates the use of the Comstock Act from the 1800s to effectively ban abortion all across the country, including banning the shipping or the sales of any materials or any equipment that could be used in abortion care. It would change federal law and leave up to the states whether or not a person who is pregnant and experiencing complications in the pregnancy would get emergency care, and in which it would again threaten to criminalize doctors who provide abortion care to people who need the pregnancy terminated in order to preserve their life or their limbs or their future viability. It would ban mifepristone, the safest form of medication abortion across the country. And it would end the National Family Planning Program, which funds a great deal of birth control for those limited means across the country, therefore seeking to undermine the kind of support system for birth control that exists in many states across the country and eliminate that national funding. In the area of immigration law, this is the area where Project 2025 really fundamentally builds on, I think, the signs that many of us saw at the recent convention in Milwaukee, which is to call for mass deportations. And it would do so in a number of different ways. The first is it would try to, again, through funding and through other mechanisms, to compel state and local law enforcement to participate in immigration enforcement. This is something that most state and local law enforcement agencies have no interest in doing and actually find counterproductive to public safety. It would restrict greatly the number and amount of people who enter the country through the legal immigration system each year. It would choke off or restrict most forms of asylum, again, ending both a legal and a moral component to the way that we've often had people enter the country. And then it would, one thing that isn't often talked about, it would expand the ability of ICE and CBP to operate vastly beyond what is currently the 100-mile marker around the border of the country in which CBP and ICE can operate, so that you could literally have ICE cruising neighborhoods in inland communities, looking for people who they believe to be non-citizens, engaging in really sort of willful racial profiling for the purposes of looking for people who might be eligible to be deported. And the final area I want to mention that where you're going to see real harm is in the area of attacks on folks who are transgender and LGBTQ+. The Project 2025 calls for the use of federal authority to eliminate all state level protections, especially for people who are transgender. It actually would call for the discrimination in the provision of gender affirming healthcare across the country and target those who cross state lines in order to seek gender affirming care. It would force schools across the country, schools receiving public funds and especially federal funds, to discriminate against students who are transgender and non-binary, a thing that most schools, especially schools in Illinois right now, deal with without any problem and without any trouble. And it would attempt in a number of different ways to roll back the impact of a Supreme Court decision from a few years ago known as Bostock, which said that federal Title VII, Title VI laws that against discrimination, especially discrimination in employment, could not be used. That those things would those laws would no longer offer protection for people because they were LGBTQ+. And so again, trying to erase the idea of someone who is not conforming either to a gender stereotype or to a heterosexual stereotype. The last thing I just want to say, and I know I'm going a little long, guys, so I apologize.
No, you're fine.
The last thing I want to say about this, because I think it's really critical to keep this in mind, is that all of this is happening against the backdrop of the Supreme Court having recently discovered an immunity for presidential actions that no one has ever found before and no one has ever conceived until it was discovered by the Supreme Court. And I think you can't separate a president who thinks they can use their power to force through policies sitting side by side with a president who can't be prosecuted for violating the law. That's an invitation, you know, for a dictator, for a king. It's not the kind of system that ours contemplated. And it's really a threat not only to our basic governmental system, but candidly, our tradition of democracy, such as it's been for these 200 plus years. So I would just close by saying I think this is one of those things that, you know, all of us need to do three basic things. We need to read this document. It is long, it's arduous, it's repetitive in some points, but I think it provides, you know, knowing the detail of what is in there is really critical. I think we need to talk to people. I think when you hear somebody say Project 2025 and say X, I think that's an invitation for all of us to have a longer conversation about what it means and what it does and what it says. And then the final thing is obviously we need to vote. We need to ensure that the people who support this kind of project are not part of power in this country because of the real harm that they can do. And the last thing I just want to say, and a little bit of a personal privilege here, if you will, I think one of the things that's important to remember here is that Project 2025, in fact, I think the whole dialogue around who might implement this or how this would work really does contemplate that this will not be someone who's elected by the popular vote. And so, you know, one of the things that you'll hear is that we need to push back against Project 2025 because we need to protect democracy. I want to suggest to you in all this that we need to not only protect democracy, we need to fix democracy. And one of the ways that that starts is that we really have to have a real discussion about ending the Electoral College. Because the fact that we could have potentially someone win the popular vote by millions of votes, but yet be faced with an agenda like Project 2025, it just shows how out of whack our quote unquote democracy has gotten and why it is that it doesn't work for many people when you consider the millions of people who could be hurt by a project like this. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions that I can answer and do my best to give you something cohesive and coherent in terms of an answer. Okay,
thanks so much, Ed. I have one question in the chat. Is Project 2025 really Trump's ideas, or does it come from the handlers? And if you could say a little more about how it came to be.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of both, right? I think that you know, one of the things that we know is that there are areas in which the former president has been very specific and very deliberate about the things that he wanted to do as president and he would do if he were returned. Number one, I think, for example, in the area of immigration, we know that he wants to see these harsh, cruel policies, the return of family separation, you know, all of those kinds of things. And I think this simply tries to look at ways to drive those policies home to the greatest degree. I think in the area of policing and other things like that, you see again this, you know, he has indicated these are all things he supports. I do think there is a little bit of a kind of a fever dream that a lot of these sort of think tanks have had in DC for years about the kinds of policies they'd like to see, the ends of ending of federal regulations around gas and oil exploration, for example, or other kinds of regulations like that, or the end of expertise within the government who question some of the things that they do. And so, you know, I think there's a little bit of a symbiotic relationship that exists both between the former president and between, as you identify, at least some of the handlers or some of the more zealous folks on, who've been part of his orbit for a while.
Got it. Thanks. Let's see. Candace has a great question. Can you speak to how Project 2025 deals with climate change?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. First, it actually suggests that the science on climate change is in question, and talks about reversing a lot of the steps that have been taken in the last 4 years to address climate change, to reverse a lot of the funding and a lot of the resources that are going to, for example, to try to move away from fossil fuels in a range of different areas. And then the second thing, and I sort of alluded to this first, sort of building on a Supreme Court decision from this year that stripped away the so-called Chevron doctrine, that was a deference that courts often gave to agencies and experts within agencies around federal regulations, would allow, in this instance, that it actually would allow for political employees and political appointees of a particular president to make far more regulatory decisions without a process of review by experts within these agencies. I think that would have a dramatic impact on a number of different areas. I think there's no question it would have a significant impact on climate change policy, especially if we saw, someone back in the Department of Interior, who's a mining official or a gas and oil official. And I think that's a place where you could clearly see those policies implicated.
Very scary, very scary. Thanks. Jody has a question that has been worrying me. Will we no longer have separation of church and state and religious freedom?
Yeah, I almost included this as a fifth area, and Jody, thank you for raising it. The document itself speaks to sort of fundamental kind of Christian values, and casts a lot of, say, greenlighting discrimination under the auspices of religious freedom and protecting religious freedom. You also see throughout there the idea of kind of allowing far more allowing far more action in defense of faith, as opposed to simply believing something for oneself. So allowing, again, more discrimination, allowing government to take more action, to put its foot on the scale in favor of a particular religious viewpoint. And so, I think those are things that are kind of laced throughout this section. And there's clearly an emphasis when it talks about religion, both implicitly and explicitly around Christian, Christian values. And that seems, kind of the norm. And I think that wall that's being erased by this Supreme Court would be further erased. I want to say, just to underscore this, because I think this is just to give a sense of this, because sometimes in life we forget. But remember that one of the things that some of the justices on the Supreme Court have railed against over the last several years is their assertion that, for example, granting marriage equality to gay and lesbian couples offends their religious viewpoints, because if they don't agree or if they don't support equal marriage, then they're going to be perceived as bigots, and that's discriminating against them. And so it is that kind of twisted or backward sort of thinking that really does kind of drive and propel a lot of this sort of thinking. And I think, Jody's right to raise this question, because it is exactly the kind of thing that we could see that could really drive a further wedge, and create sectarian struggles here.
Yeah, very scary. Let's see, Ken asked, if we defeat Trump, that's job one, but then what can we do to eliminate Project 2025 for the future?
I think one of the things is, I was thinking about this. I think one of the things has always been that you know, I always think of the people, you know, we all talked to, heard, read about people after 2016 who said, oh, it really doesn't make any difference who's president, right? And when you would say to them, but what about the Supreme Court, and say overturning Roe v. Wade, people would say, well, that's not possible. The court will never do that. Well, as we all know, they did. And I think one of the things about this is these issues that I've talked about tonight are extremely unpopular. People hate banning books. People don't like that we teach a history that's not the real history of the United States of America, that's some phony up cartoon version of it that makes some people feel good about themselves. People don't like taking away abortion rights. People don't like attacking transgender kids. And so one of the things I think for all of us to think about, and I'm going to say this in a couple of different ways. Number one, this is now the agenda that people have revealed to us, and we shouldn't forget it. And the second thing is it's not just at stake in this election, and it's not just at stake in this presidential election. You know, we ought to use this as the guide for what we think about, what we talk about, the way we look at issues. For example, at the state level, you know, our state legislators, when they're running, we ought to be asking them about these issues. We ought to be asking local government officials about these, because these are the issues that we're going to have to wrestle with as a society. And I think one of the things is that for too many years, you know, I've been saying this for a couple of years now, you know, one of the things is there ought never be a school board meeting where someone isn't there defending a book if someone's there criticizing it. There ought to never be a library board meeting where some group is allowed to just show up and criticize items in the circulation without others being there to push back against them. This tells us where they're going. The question is where we're going to go. And I think that's the place that we ought to, you know, that we ought to be moving in the direction of.
Okay, I think we can only take one more question, unfortunately. Are there specific candidates for Congress in tight races who are actually trumpeting this as their platform?
So one of the wonderful things I can say, since I'm here on behalf of the ACLU, is we don't do electoral work. So I don't know. What I would encourage you to do is look at that. Look at what, and again, I think that every candidate in every race, tight or not, ought to be asked what they think of Project 2025. I don't think that anybody should be able to run for office this year or next, quite candidly, or the year after, without being asked what they think of these things. I think, you know, undermining fundamental principles of a democratic republic ought not to be something we let people put on paper and then walk away from it and act like they didn't do it.
Yep, here. Definitely. Thanks so much, Ed. That was really great. And thanks, Indivisibles, for the good questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them.
Thank you. It's always great to be with you.
All right. And now can we, now that Ed's shown us what's incredibly at stake, Sara, can you talk to us a little bit more about what we can do in the very important swing state of Michigan?
Yes, I'm so sorry, everybody. My power has been going out here in Detroit, so let's hope it holds for just a few minutes.
It's that kind of weather here too.
My gosh.
I'm surprised mine hasn't gone off.
I mean, I'm hoping third time's the charm.
Okay.
And that was indeed just incredibly sobering. I'm gonna share my screen. Give me 1 second to pull it back up. I apologize. Very sobering. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I know it's late. I'm gonna try and be patient in my talking. Okay. I think this is where we left off. 2020. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win the White House, as does Gary Peters for Senate. Gretchen Whitmer, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, and Attorney General Dana Nessel, they all win in 2022. And for the first time in almost 30 years, the Democrats have a trifecta in Michigan. It was also the year that Michigan had the highest youth voter turnout in the nation. So what does all of this mean for us today? Well, this is the third tightly contested statewide election in Michigan in a row. This is not a surprise anymore. We are not catching anyone off guard. We know that swaying a small number of voters carries a huge weight. So what can we control? Well, we can control the number of times we reach out to voters. We started early with voter contact across the state. We're working to have conversations with voters across the state, whether it's canvassing or phone banking or text banking. And we're trying to reach more people and preparing to reach even more people. So this is what the pattern looked like: 2012, 2016, 2020. This is what we do not want to see again, another red box. We're going blue. So what is happening in Michigan? We have competitive.
Your slides are not progressing. We're still seeing one that says 2020 with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Really?
Yeah. Can you hit the slideshow and move it along?
It is. I am moving it along.
Oh, okay. We
And
can't.
I am so sorry. I am definitely moving it along. So how about I just talk? I know it's been like a
Yeah,
long
that'll be fine.
night for
Go ahead.
everybody. And I think maybe if I just talk through it, that might be easier if you all don't mind indulging me.
Makes sense.
Okay. So we have competitive races at every single level. So presidential, for the Senate, Alyssa Slotkin is in a tight race. The House seats are up, and so is the State House. And in Michigan, just as an aside, the State House and the State Senate elections happen on alternate cycles. And this cycle is the State House. So forgive me. Okay. So here's the case for all of the volunteer work that we are asking everybody to do, that people in Wisconsin are asking people to do. So there is, in outreach work, there is a field margin. And a field margin is basically the 1 to 5% of the vote that can be influenced by knocking on doors, by phone banking, by text banking, basically by meeting people where they are. And again, that Donald Trump number, he won by just over 10,000 votes. That is 0.3% of the vote. That is less than a field margin of error. That is tiny. Joe Biden won Michigan by 154,188 votes. That is 2.8% of the vote. That is also well within the 1 to 5% of the field margin. And in 2024, every single race in Michigan is going to come down to a field margin, which is basically barely anything. So before I talk about volunteering, I'm going to talk really quickly about the election cycle in Michigan and how to vote in Michigan. So this kind of dovetails nicely with Will's conversation about voter protection. We have similar voter protection efforts, as does every state. In Michigan, there are 3 ways to vote. Absentee ballots, those are mailed out 40 days prior to the election. Early in-person voting, which starts on October 26th for the November 5th general election and ends the Sunday before. And then in-person voting on election day, November 5th. So absentee voting in Michigan, you can return your ballot through a drop box or to the local clerk's office, or you can mail it. They are sent out in late September. And as soon as they are sent out, we begin a heavy push to get voters to return those ballots, to get them in early. We do it canvassing, phone banking, and text banking. New to Michigan is early voting. Thanks to the Democrats at the top of the state, there is a new way to vote. It runs into it, so it's October 26th until November 3rd, and voters can find early voting locations on the Secretary of State's website, the same place that they can find where drop boxes are and where their clerks are. And then, of course, there's election day voting. And similarly, voters can find their polling places on the Secretary of State site. And most importantly, as long as they are in line by 8 p.m., they can vote. A very funny anecdote that Alyssa Slotkin told on our volunteer kickoff Zoom last night was that in 2022, they decided, and this is also a great illustration of how outreach makes such a big difference. Her team decided that they were going to text their Michigan State contact list on election day in 2022. And they thought that they would just send out a round of texts and kind of be done with it. And what happened, and Kitty, correct me if I'm getting some parts of the story wrong, was that they ended up spending 5 hours texting students, many of whom were not registered, but Michigan has same day registration. So you can register on the same day and vote. And they didn't know this. They were confused about what the election was. Is abortion on the ballot? Am I voting for president? Who am I voting for? And so her team ended up texting people for 5 hours, and there were voters still in line on campus at 8 o'clock. And her campaign spent $10,000 buying pizza for everyone waiting in line because they were still allowed to vote. And this is the cycle where Michigan had the largest youth turnout in any state. These things make a difference. This type of outreach really makes a difference. Who knows how many voters, how many students they got to turn out just because they sent some inordinate number of texts to every single one in their Michigan State University population. So our volunteers are doing really basically 3 things. They are making phone calls from home. They are text banking from home. Thank you, Kitty, for running 2 of those. And they are canvassing in state. And all of those options are equally important and equally vital to our campaign. I am going to cut myself short here and just say that if you are interested in volunteering in Michigan, if you know people interested in volunteering in Michigan, we have so many ways to connect you. Indivisible runs, Kitty and Laura run 2 of our text banks. Bill runs 1 of our phone banks. We have in-state staff running them as well. And we have other people in basically California and Illinois actually running phone banks as well to help us build capacity and make as many phone calls as we possibly can this cycle. If you want to travel to Michigan, I'm your person. You can reach out to me and I will help you figure out all of the complicated, not so complicated logistics around traveling to Michigan. And then I want to give one final push and use one final example to talk about the field margin, which Alyssa Slotkin's student example demonstrated, but also I want to hypothetically propose that you come to Michigan to canvass and you're there for a couple days. I think these are the numbers I used last night, and you knock on 400 doors. And let's say 20, 25 people open their doors for you. And let's say you have 2 conversations about issues that matter to these voters, that get these voters thinking about issues that matter to them and who might best represent them in these choices. These are very light touch persuasion canvases. We talk about issues, we share personal stories, why the issue might mean something to us, and we hear their stories back. Those 2 voters, that's the margin. That's what Donald Trump won by. Those 2 voters in that precinct, that changes absolutely everything. So I want to just emphasize that no job is too small. No amount of effort is too small. That's how tight the margin is. And that's how tight it is for every single race. For Alyssa Slotkin, for Harrison Walls, we have two incredible women running for Supreme Court Justice in Michigan, like unbelievably accomplished, incredible women. And the races are tight now, but also the turnout is low. And we need to increase voter turnout. That is what is going to make the difference. Primary turnout was low. And we are not going to let that happen in the general election. So
That's right. We're not going to let that happen. Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, we did put your you put your own email in the chat, and of course in our newsletter there are all kinds of ways to volunteer to do things in and for Michigan and Wisconsin. So make sure you check the newsletter. And I'm just going to do a little bit of a wrap up. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone, very much. Thank you, Kitty.
Just going to share my screen. And okay. I can't find the, oh, there it is. There it is. Okay. What I'm going to do is wrap up a little bit about how we can talk about 2025. What's the messaging that will work the best for us with our friends and family, and when we're canvassing and when we're phone banking and so on. And I liked this cartoon of the elephant in the room. I don't know if you can see it with the little Zoom squares on top of it, but you know, the media is covering conspiracy theories, and then there's this giant elephant in the room, which is Project 25. I think that's pretty accurate. But we have caught on to how important it is to communicate 2025 to everyone. You could certainly see that during the DNC. One of my favorite moments in the whole convention was when Kenan Thompson came out and said, "Did you ever see a document that could kill a small animal and democracy at the same time?" And he is totally right. And the other reason I thought that skit was really brilliant was that you remember he brought out a different person. You know, one person, for example, worked for the Department of Education, and he said, "Oh, I've got some bad news for you. Here on page 945, it says they'll abolish the Department of Education." So we clearly, the Democratic Party and progressives are all in agreement that we need to talk about this horrible thing. So what are the key messages we want to convey about this to our friends and our family and our neighbors and etc.? One great piece of advice is focus on your audience's interests. Is the person a teacher? Talk about education impacts. Is it a young woman? Talk about reproductive freedom. An environmental activist? Talk about impacts on climate change. Meet your audience where they are. Just make sure they know how dangerous this is. So, you know, you might begin by asking if you've heard about it, and then explain these kinds of things. It's a 900-page playbook for Republicans, focusing on attacking our rights, giving handouts to billionaires, and undermining your vote. And it's all about giving Trump the power over you and your family. It's about losing freedom and somebody else making your decisions for you. According to Anat Shanker, who some of us follow, she's a messaging expert. She says that the research shows that voters are the most worried about removing checks on presidential power, which would allow Trump to be completely unrestrained, taking away our freedom to decide when, whether, and how to have children. This would amount, as we were just hearing, There would be a national ban on medication abortion drugs, and it advocates for fetal personhood rights, which would inevitably lead to restricting abortion and fertility services like IVF and contraception nationally. And also it talks about taking away our freedom to thrive by making cuts to programs like Social Security and Medicare by raising the age of eligibility and by giving corporations more control over our families. So she suggests that we use one of these to anchor our messages. The ACLU says that friends do ask friends to vote. You can multiply your impact this election by engaging friends and family. Tests show that a friend-to-friend contact can increase voter turnout by up to 8%, and have double the impact of a cold call, a text, or a door knock. So we should be, taking advantage of our friend and family networks, especially if they're in swing states. Another example, a text message from a friend increased the likelihood to vote by 8 points, far exceeding traditional organizing methods. And don't forget, when you're talking to people, some of the tools we've learned about in these members meetings that make voting and registering easier. They're great things to share with friends and family. There's the Blue Voter Guide, which shows you what will be on your ballot and makes and shares with you progressive recommendations about who to vote for, whether to vote yes or no on some kind of an initiative. And the other tool that's great is Voterizer. There you can check the status of your voter registration, and often you can register to vote online. So these are great tools to share with friends and family. And then I just want to wrap up by saying, I'll go back to the Zoom here. By reminding everybody that, like we said, in our newsletter that comes out every Monday, except Labor Day, when it will come out on Tuesday, I believe, that there are loads of ways to get involved with this election. Michelle Obama told us all to do something. And in that newsletter, you can find, ways to do things in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Illinois. There are things to fit everybody's schedule. There are still postcards to swing states available. We are still having postcard parties every Monday on Zoom, plus an in-person one every couple weeks. And there are loads of opportunities to knock on doors, to phone bank, and to text bank. So we ask everybody, please do something, like Michelle says. And that's it for me. Do you have anything you want to wrap up with, Candace?
Nope. Thanks everybody for coming and sticking with us, and please make your plan and we'll stay in touch. Thanks everybody for coming. We'll send out the recording to this meeting to everybody who registered tonight, so you can share it with friends or pull any information out. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.